Between the hills, the stars, the sky, the river so clear, river so clear.
As we deepen into our service, let us set the tone for this service with a reading by Michelle LaGrave. We come to religious community from many paths with diverse needs. If you have come here seeking comfort, may your pain be soothed. If you've come here looking for answers, may you find new questions. If you've come here seeking purpose, may your call be awakened. If you've come here hoping to build a new way, may the path open before you. We join Unitarian Universalists all over the world in lighting our chalice. Would Kim come forward, please, to light the chalice, which is a symbol of the spark of life in each of us. If you're on Zoom and have your chalice with you, I invite you to turn on your video to share while we light them. We are in good company. As we light this flame, we remember friends and loved ones, near and far, and we give thanks. As the fire burns brightly, we open our minds and hearts to new ways of being, and we feel alive. As the room glows with warmth and kindness, we extend our circle even wider to welcome those who want to come in, and we know love.
We are working to be free, hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, and it's the key. We can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without these, this world would die. Peace and freedom is our cry.
Our program this morning is by Cheryl Ann Carey. Her Native American name is Hunkua Twain, or something close to that. She's an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. In 2013, she was awarded a Bush Fellowship, which served as a significant role as she established the Sacred Pipe Resource Center, a nonprofit organization serving the American Indian population in Bismarck-Mandan. Cheryl is probably one of the best educated people in this town. She got an undergraduate degree, a Bachelor of Science from the University of Mary, 2 master's degrees from the University of Mary, and a PhD from UND. I think she is well schooled in what she is trying to do with our Native American community here. She has received numerous awards and is currently serving as the executive director for the Sacred Pipe Resource Center. She describes herself as an introvert, which is maybe why she's sitting way in the back. But she, in addition to a full-time job, she has 4 children.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak here today. It's always a joy to come back and see people, see friends here, and also to share a little bit about Indigenous perspectives and thoughts, and especially in a place where I know it's well received. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate that. So today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite sayings. I just heard it recently and it just went straight through me. And the saying is, when you pray, move your feet. And I felt like that really spoke to me, because that's always been, our philosophy as Indigenous people, that it's great to pray, but your prayers are really when you help people, when you reach out. And so that's kind of been my philosophy. And so I kind of take it as a theme of what I wanted to talk about today, because whenever you get asked to talk about Indigenous things, it's always difficult because of the complexity of all things Indigenous, right? And it's so hard to encapsulate something in a short amount of time before people start nodding off. And so I didn't want that to happen. But I always say it's really hard to talk about Indigenous things. It's like teaching poetry to people who don't know the alphabet, right? You got to talk about some very complex things, and there isn't always a baseline understanding. Now, I know that isn't this group here. I know this group is far ahead of a lot of people. But I wanted today to be something helpful for y'all. And so bear with me, because I am going to review 500 years of history in about 5 minutes. And the reason I want to talk about history and talk about the changing, the blowing winds of history is because to point out that we're constantly evolving, like we're constantly changing as cultures, we're constantly growing, changing, moving, evolving. And that includes not just Indigenous culture, but that includes allyship and what allyship looks like. That has evolved over the years as well. And so I wanted to kind of put that in a historical context and then talk about today. So I have this little graph, and if anybody wants it, I can email it or send it or whatever, but it's one that I've used in a lot of different types of trainings, most significantly our historical trauma training, when we talk about historical trauma, because it talks about how it's called the pendulum of policies, and it talks about the changing nature of governmental policies and its impact on Indigenous nations. And when we constantly change policies, it creates chaos, right? We think about parenting rules. If you change your rules in your household, how much chaos that causes with your kids, right? So it's kind of the same thing with Indigenous tribes. So over the years, we've had a lot of shifting policies, and a lot of times those policies have shifted from friendly policies and allyship to hostile policies and outright violence. So the first policy, I guess we'll call mutual aid. This time period is the time period from first contact until about the early 1600s, called mutual aid. That's my name. I don't know. Mutual aid. That's the time that we made treaties, right? Came together. We saw that people needed help, and so the first Thanksgiving and all that jazz, and started making treaties, right? As Indigenous people were like, yeah, there's land here. Come on over and have some land, and we'll teach you how to hunt, we'll teach you how to fish, all that kind of stuff. And in those original treaties and in those original negotiations, as they're recorded, a lot of them talked about the relationship between our red brothers, right? We're grateful for our red brothers. Well, as the powers changed, as things shifted, the power dynamics shifted, then we went to the other extreme of a time period called separation, a time of violence in early to mid 1600s, where there were outright Indian wars. There was the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And if you notice the narratives that happened in history, they started to talk about our red children. We were no longer brothers, we were children. So the temperature changed. In the mid 1800s to late 1800s, things started to change. And a lot of that had to do with allyship, with people who spoke up and said, this isn't right. The way that we are removing tribes is not right. And so the attitude, the policy then became one of assimilation. We got to live together, you got to assimilate, right? So this time period was called coercive assimilation, which is characterized by the General Allotment Act, which broke up reservations. You know, we're going to make good little farmers and capitalists out of natives, and so General Allotment Act broke up reservations. And then the boarding school era. We're going to take kids and put them in the boarding school and teach them how to be workers, right? But one of the first significant acts of allyship that happened was right around that time period, the end of that time period in the early 1900s, when a group of non-native allies got together and wrote the Miriam Report. They actually went to all the reservations and looked at the conditions and the conditions of the boarding schools and wrote this report that spurred some very supportive policies in the 1930s. So the Miriam Report, in my mind, is probably one of the most significant forms of allyship that happened in our history, because it really changed the tide of a lot of policies. So the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 is what characterized that time period. That's when what we currently know as our tribal councils were formed. So our tribal councils were finally recognized as you have the authority to govern yourselves. And that came directly out of the recommendations of the Miriam Report. Unfortunately, as we know, what happens in politics, we have that struggle between the R's and the D's, the red and the blue. And so in 1953, there was a movement mainly for natural resources that belonged under tribal ownership. And so it started a time period from 1953 to about early 1970s called termination. And that was characterized by a policy, HR 108 in 1953, that actually sought to terminate tribal reservations. As a matter of fact, Turtle Mountain was on the list of tribes to be terminated. Also characterized by the policy of relocation. The government ordered the Bureau of Indian Affairs to relocate people, or to start a program to relocate Native people from their tribes into the bigger cities. That's why you'll see large contingents of Native Americans living in places like Chicago, Minneapolis, San Francisco, Phoenix, some of those larger cities. Those are relocation cities. And so termination, again, was a really detrimental policy, but was also halted by allyship. So in the mid-1960s, this whole movement towards civil rights started building, and that was the allyship not just of Native and non-Native people, but also of Black people, of Hispanic people who came together and demanded civil rights. This was the time period of the American Indian movement, where Native people began understanding how government works and reclaiming some of their concepts of sovereignty. And so this is what we call the pendulum swung very sharply again to friendly policies in the 70s called tribal restoration. And tribal restoration was characterized by the several policies that were that were passed at that time: the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968, the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978, and the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. And then there's the American Indian Self-Determination and Educational Assistance Act. Several acts that were passed during that time period that were very supportive of Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination was the word. So again, what happens? Whoosh, you go back over because that's what happens. So beginning with I'm gonna name him Reagan's election in the 80s, then we characterize this time period as limitation, because we didn't go fully back into the termination era. I think that was legally stopped at that point, where we can no longer terminate, but we can limit. So one of the major policies acts passed in that time period was the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which really limited sovereignty and said you have to share with the states, you have to work with the states, and that sort of thing. So it was another example of how even though they didn't challenge sovereignty and tribal right to exist in an outward way, it was much still challenged. And then again, pendulum swung the other direction. Early 2000s, in 2009, with the election of Obama, when we had, again, several acts that were passed and several actions, executive orders that were done under his leadership that were very supportive of Indigenous people. The Tribal Law and Order Act of 2010 really strengthened tribal policing and our ability to protect people within our own reservation boundaries. The strengthening of the VAWA Act. The VAWA had been passed, Violence Against Women Act had been passed, but in 2013 there was a major strengthening of that act under the Obama administration. And then he started the White House Tribal Nations Conferences, which ran for 6 or 7 years, something like that, which is really just bringing Indigenous leaders to the White House and talking about all of the issues that impact Indigenous people. So there was a really hopeful time period in Indian country. And then I don't have to tell y'all what happened. But what I call this time period is called the Second Conquest. And the Second Conquest was 2017 with the election of Trump to the present. And even though we did have a Democratic president in there, there was not a significant movement forward. At best, it was a status quo presidency. And so a lot of the things that are being, perpetrated under this administration is a lot of the executive orders. As a matter of fact, technically this is not Native American Heritage Month for the first time in I don't know how many years, because he did not sign an executive order recognizing this as Native American Heritage Month. But we're still celebrating it. And North Dakota did specifically. So that's cool. But there's a lot of other tribal supports that he also did not, that he ignored. He brought up the questions about tribal citizenship, just the opening of Indigenous lands, sacred places for, that drill baby drill philosophy. So there's a lot of ways that this time period also shifted over into that violent time period. So in looking at all of these, the way the pendulum has swung, and it is like a wide swing. If you look at the time periods, it's wide swings, and now it's kind of getting, how a pendulum actually goes really wide at first, and then it starts getting shorter and shorter and shorter. That's kind of where we are now, where this pendulum is just kind of like a little sharp tug of war now. And so I think because of that, the time right now is of the essence for allies and for allyship. And I think this idea of this concept of allyship has evolved over the years. It's been around for years, but we've just sort of honed in on what does that actually mean. And so I encourage you to think about what that means today, because historically, I think allyship, helping, meant charity. And charity does help. I'm not chucking charity. It does help. But what allyship means is leaving out the judgment, the hierarchy, the less than. It means being a good relative. You notice I wore my shirt today specifically. It means being a good relative to each other. And John F. Kennedy said one time, and I always remembered this and loved it, he said that Indigenous people were the miner's canary. How we treat Indigenous people is how eventually we are going to treat all Americans. And we are finding that especially true today in an environment where every working person right now is a target for the predator class. I think as allies, the evolution of allyship means this: help where your well-being is bound up in mine, and we walk alongside each other. And that's what we really try to do. I'm going to do a shameless plug for Sacred Pipe Resource Center, because that's not only my work, that's my life, is that we try to get Native people to raise their voice, to speak up. And hopefully when they raise their voice, they get that courage in Deep Red, North Dakota, to raise their voice and to speak up. And they look behind them, there's somebody there. because that's important. That's how we help repair the deliberate breakdown of families and communities that the US government perpetrated in our communities. Deliberate breakdown of families and communities. And first, the first principle of allyship is removing that sense of judgment. Oh, why are they this way? Why are that way? It's a personal failing. It's a moral failing. It isn't. It was a deliberate breakdown perpetrated by policies that ripped families apart, that judged families, that criminalized ways. That's a deliberate breakdown of families and communities. And so we're healing as Indigenous people. We're healing. And, but we do need help with that. But we need the kind of healing that we give each other as relatives, right? Not the kind that says, oh, quit crying, get over it, and just go pray, or just go do this, go work. The kind of compassion that you give your relatives, where when someone goes through hardship, you sit beside them and you hold their hand and you understand and you say, I'll be here. You tell me what I need to do. That is true allyship, and I think that's the kind of thing that's going to make our world a better place. So I think in many ways that we do want to revitalize our Indigenous communities. We do want to revitalize the practices, the cultural practices of putting up teepees and making war bonnets, all those things, beadwork, all those things that are outward manifestations of our culture. But the bigger challenge remains what it's always been, and that's what's inward. And the challenge for us has always been, how do we live our values and beliefs and our spirituality and our perspectives in a world that was not created for us? I say this all the time. The systems that we operate in as Indigenous people, none of them were made for us. Not the education system, not the court system, not the child welfare system, not our government systems. None of those were made for us. And so we walk through life living in a world that doesn't have our values. But I will say this, that the Indigenous agenda is an ultra-progressive agenda. And that's good news for y'all, because I know where your hearts are. We believe as Indigenous people that everybody should be fed and clothed and housed and have the ability to make decisions for themselves and be respected for who they are. And these values often run counter to the capitalist agenda. And so we're constantly the target of that agenda. And I loved what Jim shared this morning about, his work and what he's doing, because that is allyship, coming together for a common purpose that has the well-being of all people in mind. In fact, it reminded me of my own German from Russia heritage when I first started researching about, this. I'm going to tell this story because I think it's cute. My daughter, I used to work down in 48s, and I would drive back and forth to work, and she was little at the time. She was probably only about 8 years old, but a very precocious kid. And so we were driving one day, and it was Thanksgiving time, and she was looking out the window, pondering life as a little 8-year-old would do. And finally she turns to me and she said, Mom, am I Native? Am I Indigenous? And I said, yeah, you are. And then she sat there for a while, and then she said, and are you white? And I said, yeah, I'm half white. Your grandpa's white, And then she looked out the window and then she said, Mom, why did your people kill my people? So we had to go into this big, long speech about how that wasn't necessarily the case. But it reminded me of, how we need to teach history. Because when you really start looking at history, what I found in history is that they actually called the Germans from Russia that moved here white Indians. Because so many of our values aligned, as Jim was saying, the family and the respect and the, Lord knows, the feeding people, that the Germans from Russia were very much aligned very closely with the natives. And it was a deliberate government effort to separate the two by pointing out color difference. And I think that continues to this day, that our government uses color to separate people who have much deeper commonalities, care for land, care for each other, care for people, than color would ever reach. So there was a prophecy, I think, many years ago that's kind of, circulating that, but many Indigenous people believe that we're seeing today, and that is that Indigenous ways will lead a revolution, a rainbow of people that will heal the world. And I'm always hopeful. I'm very hopeful. So I believe that. And I believe that because I also know that there's a core anagram in the word revolution, and that is love. Loved being with you guys today. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of your service. Thank you so much for being allies. And I hope we all commit today, this month, to be that true allies in whatever way we can and create that revolution.
And this responsive reading is called We Answer the Call to Love. In the face of hate, we answer the call of love. In the face of exclusion, we answer the call of inclusion. In the face of homophobia, we answer the call of the LGBTQ rights. In the face of racism, we answer the call of justice for all races. In the face of xenophobia, we answer the call of pluralism. In the face of misogyny, we answer the call of women's rights. In the face of demagoguery, we answer the call of reason. In the face of religious intolerance, we answer the call of diversity. In the face of narrow nationalism, we answer the call of global community. In the face of bigotry, we answer the call of open-mindedness. In the face of despair, we answer the call of hope. As Unitarian Universalists, we answer the call of love, now more than ever. Thank you. As we come to the end of our service, may you depart from our time together, buoyed by the spirit of life, delighted by the warmth of our gathering, and renewed in soul and mind. As we extinguish the flame of our chalice, may its lingering spark be carried in your heart until we are together again.